Welcome. This is a class on the basics using astrology and cycles, and I've met most of you actually at a couple of other workshops, I think, except for Frank and a couple of other people. So what we're going to do today, and I know I've seen several of you at other seminars of Ray's, what we're going to do today is go over some real basics of astrology, and I want you to bear with me because we have several levels here. How many of you, that's what I always like to do, how many of you, not from the trader standpoint, but from the astrological information standpoint, would say honestly, now don't be shy, how many of you are on the beginning level? Okay, how many are not on the beginning level? Let's check that one out. Okay, how many of you would say you're at the intermediate? How about advanced? Okay, great, great. This is perfect because this is geared, I mean, it'll suit everyone, and I'm going to be approaching this from a little different angle because what I think we should do when we're learning the basics with astrology, and of course you all are working with a system that is very visual. And astrology really requires not only the left brain analytic function, but it also requires the right brain visual function. And so my purpose today is to kind of show you how to make those two parts of your brain move together. And I have a lot of graphics so that we can go through it. I don't want you to be shy about, I think there's somebody coming in. I don't want you to be shy about raising your hands that you're confused or if you have a question, unless it involves something that at that moment doesn't make sense. Raise your hand, but I'd like you to save the questions for after if we could, okay? Because we have a lot today. Well, the first thing I'd like to say, my name is Georgia Stathis, and I was invited by Ray Merriman to speak at your pre-workshop today, and Ray just walked in. And I've been an astrologer since 1977, and that's what I do for a living. I'm a full-time professional astrologer, and I do a lot of client work, and I do a lot of company analysis work. In other words, taking an organizational chart or a first trade chart and looking at the cycles. And I'm also a teacher at Kepler College, faculty up in Seattle, Washington. So I teach a lot of beginners who are inundated with this information. And so the good news for you all is I just taught this, about part of this, I mean, just a piece of it, about 2 weeks ago for a week in Seattle. So hopefully, when we're going through it, you'll have the better of the two runs. First of all, as you all know, astrology is the study of cycles. And actually, if you translate the word, astros, logos, I mean, it literally is from the Greek word. Astros is the stars or the skies, and logos is the science of or the study of. And as with anything in cycles, traders, astrologers, it is a study of what we call relationships. Everybody asks about, well, what does this mean if Mercury is in this or Mars is in this? Well, yes, that's very, very important, but how the different planets work together in terms of a dynamic, in terms of literally a geometric dynamic is very important. And what I would hope to do today with all of you is to help you recognize some of those geometric dynamics which may cause, when you're doing the work you do, whether you're doing this for astrology or for your cycles work, to see if there'd be a stress point at which there might be a reversal or a shift. So I will be going over the planets and their meanings today, but before we even go there, I'd like to talk about some basic stuff, okay? And what we have on the overhead here is a very simple drawing of relationships of the planets in the solar system. And this is not to scale, of course, but here we have the sun in the center. We have Mercury being the first planet from the sun. And the one thing that's really interesting when you look at these is if Mercury is the first planet from the sun, what is the last planet according to this graph of the distance from what's the last planet from the sun? Pluto, right? So we're going from bottom to top. Now, it would make sense if Mercury is the closest to the sun that it's the fastest because it has a lesser time to circle around the sun. So, you know, when we're working a lot in either astrology or trading, we work a lot for the day-to-day with the inner planets. And in fact, what's interesting is before they had telescopes up to about 1781, they actually believed that Saturn was the last planet in the sky, thousands and thousands of years. And that's why I have at the top of this graph, perceived limitation at Saturn. So Saturn has a lot to do with checkpoints, if you will, the rules. If you think of Saturn, Saturn's this planet with a ring around it, correct? I mean, that's what we recognize it with. And if in the old days, before 1781, they were able to see out to Saturn, which we can still do on a night that's not foggy or polluted, if in the old days you could see out to Saturn, they really believe that that's as far as you can go. It's kind of like the Columbus theory. You can only go so far to the edge of the Earth and then you fall off, right? Well, then they had telescopes and suddenly all hell broke loose because we had Uranus, which was orbiting on its side, and we will go through that to talk about it. But the reason I want us to look at the perceived limitation at Saturn is that, in fact, even today, even though we have these outer planet transits always, Saturn seems to be a real great way of measuring timing in terms of a longer kind of cycle, because it does suggest limitation in whatever portion of the sky it's going through. And we'll go through that in a minute, but I just wanted you to see the relationships here, because as we're working today, we're going to talk about how they do affect cycles, okay? Any questions about that? It's pretty clear, isn't it? Okay. Now, relationships. What is a relationship? You know, there's all kinds of questions about what relationships are. There are relationships between, the relationships between planets are what we call the aspects. And I'm sure you all understand that there's harder aspects, more difficult aspects, stressful aspects, and we'll talk about the numbers, versus the easier aspects. And basically, a hard aspect is when two planets are not communicating as easily as they might at another cycle. So at that point, there's some sort of a resistance, okay? Now, what I thought I would show you, and I think this is really an important drawing, and it is in your packet, and if I were you, I would take this drawing home if you want to learn how to measure these things out. This is probably one of the most important drawings that you'll probably ever get in terms of checking cycles. What you're seeing in front of you, it looks like an asterisk, right? Okay. How many parts does this asterisk have? 8, right? Okay. So if we don't even think about it, we know our basic geometry, right? We know that, you know, if we go vertically to the straight up, that's at 0. Okay? Now, if we move, regardless, if we move to this line over here, what angle is this at? That's a 90-degree angle, is it not? Okay, and then if we continue to move through the sky and we go here, what do we have? What's that distance? It's 180, right? And 180 is, if you drew a circle around this, that is the diameter of a circle, okay? It's what we call an opposition. And if you think about it, I call this the rubber band aspect, because in a circle, the furthest that you can go is 180 degrees, okay? You can't go any further. If you were to stretch a rubber band out, you could only go this far, and you're going to have to do one of two things, right? You're going to keep going, and it's going to break, right? If I had a rubber band here, I'd show you, but, you know, are you guys playful or what? You look so serious. All right. Well, let's just pretend we had a rubber band and we were being bad kids in school, okay? If we were doing this to one of the kids in the room, we'd go boom, and we'd hit them, right? Or it would break and snap on our fingers. So this is a really, really, really important geometric distance, is 180. Now, let's keep going. If we go from here to here, this is kind of a trick question, actually. What's this angle? 90. But if we take the full from the top all the way over, it's what? It's 270, right? And then if we look at it just from there to there, it's 90, right? So in other words, it's closing, right? And then we continue, go back to 0. Now, this is what I call the theory of nines. I want you to think about this. And in fact, I'm going to put the right one up. I don't want to mess up on this. No, we're not going to do that. Let's just put this on the board. Okay, we're going to put, why don't you fellas help me and ladies help me? This is going to be what over here? 90. 90. All right. What's this going to be over here? Okay, other people can answer. It's okay. 270. Okay, great, 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 great. Okay, now let's break it down a little bit more. If this is 0 and this is 90, this is what? Except it's not even. It's what? 45, okay? All right, so if this is 90 and this is 180, what is this? Say it? 135, correct? Okay, and if this is 180 and 270, now it gets tricky. What is this? 225, right? Okay. And if, oh, this is very tricky. What is, if this is 270 and this is actually 360, what would this be? 315, correct. Okay, now here's the fun thing about this. Let's try this. Let's add 9 and 0 equals what? Okay, 180 degrees equals what? 1, 8, and 0 is what? All right. 270 degrees is what? Okay. What's 45? 9. Okay, what's 135? Very, very good. Okay, 225 is what? 9. And then lastly, 315 is what? Is there a similarity in those numbers? Okay. Well, you know, if we venture a little bit to the right here, and I'm not going to go too off to the right, but this is kind of how I want you to get into the organic part of this, is that, you know, there's numerology and there's numbers. And they only use 9 numbers in numerology, 1 through 9, and then they start with 1 again. And one of the things that's very interesting in mathematics or in addition or whatever is that if you have an entire list of numbers, you can just cross out the 9s and not even bother to add them in, because they always give themselves up to the other numbers. So all these angles, which are considered to be hard angles, add up to 9, which means at that point there's going to usually be some sort of a change. And you can get it even smaller than this, like 22.5. That's another one. That adds up to what? It's a 9, even though it's 22.5. We're using a decimal here, but it's still a 9. So these are resistance patterns, is what we find. We're using a horoscope for a person, a company, or whatever. And I suspect that in trading it's very similar. Now, the thing that's interesting about this drawing is that it's exactly the same cycle as, and really a basic cycle for pretty much all the planetary cycles. It is a basic cycle for how long it takes the moon to go around in one orbit, in one entire orbit in a month. It takes 28.5 days for the moon to make an entire cycle, okay? And we always start at what? The new moon, right? New moon is when the moon's dark, when there's no moon in the sky, okay? I've never understood why they say this, but if you look at the sky and the right half is light, it should really be first half, but they call it first quarter. It's 90 degrees. That's the moon cycle. If you look at the moon when it's full, it's at 180 degrees. That's when the Earth is between the sun and the moon. And then the last quarter moon is the same 90 degrees, except it's dying on the vine. It's the end of the cycle when the last quarter, L, is the left side of the moon is white. Last quarter is left white. That's how I always remember it. And so this is one of the fastest cycles that we have. The moon moves about every 2.5 days. And its speed runs between about 11 degrees a day and about 14, 15 degrees a day. Sometimes the moon is moving slowly, sometimes the moon is moving quickly. But I know in terms of a lot of events, what we do, you can have an entire chart for an event to happen, and if the moon is making a change in terms of its cycle, especially on one of these major points, which is at 90 degrees, 180 or 270 or the last quarter, 90, then there's usually some sort of a change. And this is actually a cycle. If we take this off, am I going too fast for you guys, or are you getting this? Any questions? Any comments? Nothing? Huh? Just keep going? Okay. Okay, so let's go back to the basic drawing. I know you don't just work with the moon when you work as traders. You work with a lot of things, right? You sometimes might work with the slow Saturn with something else, right? Or Mars and Saturn, or Mercury and Saturn, whatever. Every pair of planets, I don't care if it's Pluto and the moon, or Uranus and Mars, every pair of planets, when they pair up, have some sort of a relationship with each other at any moment in the sky. And if the relationship happens to be happening, that they're having a distance that's a 90, a 180, a last quarter 270, or even a subcycle like a 45 sub, then there's usually going to be some sort of pressure and some sort of a shift, which means either something will move up or down. And that's basically looking at the 9 theory. You know, we have 9, 9, 9, 9, 9. Okay? I know you're confused right now, but we'll work with it. I'm actually going to have you guys do a little exercises to show you how to decide when you're working with planets or when you're working with the moon, if you don't have the means in front of you, how to know whether it's first quarter or last quarter. Is it dying or is it growing? There's a really easy way to do that. And you can actually do that with all the planets. You can do that with Jupiter-Saturn relationships. You know, every 20 years, we know, because there's a synodic cycle, whenever two planets come together and meet, at one point that's called a synodic cycle. I mean, the new moon, when the sun and the moon are together, that's a little mini synodic cycle. Synodic is spelled S-Y-N-O-D-I-C. The outer planets, like Jupiter and Saturn, you know, Jupiter takes about, what, 12 years to make a full cycle. Saturn takes about 29.5, say 30 years. They're not running at the same pace. One is a little slower than the other. But at a certain point, every 20 years, for those two, for that pair, they come together and they are at 0 degrees. They're beginning a new cycle, which would basically put it at the top here at the 0 position. And then as they continue, you see how the two relate to each other as they move through time. And if they're in a relationship at any point in time where they're in a hard aspect, one of these 90s, 180s, 45s, there is some sort of a shift. It's a really great way to work if you're going to work with cycles, and we will do that. I just want to kind of just blast you with some ideas here, so as we're working with planets and speeds and what they mean, you can kind of be getting what we're talking about. This eightfold cycle is probably one of the most important in astrology. One of, I would say, for me, from my own personal opinion, this is the most important. That if you know how to read this, that you can see when things are shifting. Okay? Okay. Any questions thus far? It's clear? Any confusion? All right. Let me find my paper here. All right. Now I'm going to put something on the board, and I know you're all very bright, and I don't want you to think too much. Okay? I just want you to look at this, okay? This is another kind of geometric visual thing, okay? We said that any two relationships between planets are what? They're called what? They're aspects, right? Synodic is when two planets come together at 0, okay? But any relationship, if it's, 45 or 20 degree distance or 30 degree distance, it's called an aspect. And there's millions and millions and millions of aspects. In fact, I have this great tool. I should have pulled it out. And it might be something worth getting at some point because it's a great way to learn. It's actually from Circle Books. It's a very old model, the Aspect Finder. And basically, you can, like today, for example, the moon at 1 p.m. today went into Taurus, right? 0 degrees. It went into Taurus. All right. So you take the white dot and you put it at what I'm examining. Maybe I'm looking at the moon, okay? And then I can measure where all the other planets are in the sky, because a horoscope, a map, is a drawing of where all the planets are in the sky and the relationships they have to each other. Then you can see, okay, Saturn right now is at about 22 degrees, all right? What's the relationship between this position and this position? It'll give you a little mark here, okay? And it'll explain what that is on the back. That's a 45 degree, okay? These are great. This is a great way to learn aspects, and I'll pass this around, fellas. I do want it back. But you can take down the address. It's from AFA. It's a great little tool. So if the two relationships between two planets are aspects, all right, let's look at this idea. And don't think too much. It's just a picture, okay? Okay. This is an illustration of aspects. Now, I want to clarify one thing here. When we're working with Western astrology, we're working with Earth, geocentric, like the Earth is the center, okay, not the sun. The sun is heliocentric, correct? And actually, I know in financial, helio works very well. But what we're working with primarily today is geo, okay? So here we again, we have the real solar system, and we have the real sun in the middle. But if you look up here at the green circle with the cross in it, think of that as Earth, okay? And this is from the view of Earth. Geocentric is from the view of Earth. That's why I think helio works very well and geo works very well, because if in fact you're experiencing cycle shifts on the Earth, because you're feeling the planetary angles from the Earth. In other words, you're feeling the energy from this point. But the heliocentric works very well too. But if you look at this, we have the Earth and we have a cross, okay? And When a planet, for example, let's just use the moon as a simple example. Here's the sun. The green thing is the Earth. Let's pretend that red spot up there that says 180 is the moon. That would be a full moon. That's 180 degrees. They're opposite each other. Okay? If you notice to the left, you see quadrature 90 degrees west. Can you all see that? Okay, and to the right, you see quadrature 90 degrees east. Those are 90-degree angles. In other words, from your perspective, standing here, I'm having a 90-degree angle. I'm seeing two planets that are in relationship to each other having a 90-degree angle, which is, it adds up to a 9, which means what? Something's about to transition, correct? In fact, a good way to learn this, in fact, this is a really good way to learn this. You know when you're driving in the car and you have a car that, there's some cars that I noticed as of last night have really good blind spots and some cars that don't have such blind spots. I noticed that my rental doesn't have that good a blind spot. Thank goodness I noticed it. But you know, somebody's driving, you're driving along, and you're supposed to check your blind spot, right? And you look at your peripheral vision to look back. You can't see something unless you turn, right? Well, sometimes if you're just looking back slightly for the blind spot, that can sometimes be kind of like a 45-degree angle. I always call the 45-degree angle, if it was a snake, it would have bit you, because it's the beginning of some stress that's coming up. It's the beginning. But when somebody moves right to your side, you can see them, right? It's like this drawing that we had up. It's a 90-degree angle. I see in front of me, and I see the planets to the right, or I see the planets to the left. Okay? Now, if you recall, when we were talking about it was in here a minute ago, we were talking about the moon cycle. Okay? And let me erase this. Can I take it off the board? Okay. Like the new moon, and then we had the first quarter, last quarter. Don't even think moon, just think quarters. Think just quarters, halves. Don't think moon here, all right? This is the resistance point at 90, correct? Now, isn't this interesting? Because if you think about the moon in terms of just an image or a picture in the sky, it's equally dark, equally light. Before it gets to this point, it only looks like this. You've seen that beautiful moon in the sky that has a sliver? There's just a little light, and there's a whole lot of dark. But as you move down to this 45, then you're getting more white, light, and you're getting dark. See, so you know when something at the first quarter relationship between two planets, that this is definitely, it's pushing both ways, up or down, it's resisting. Same thing when it gets to this position. Okay, I just wanted to make that clear. Am I being a little obtuse? Is somebody not getting this? Okay. All right. Now let me move this out. All right. Now I do have in your packet, which unfortunately I do not have an overhead for this, but I'm wondering how we're going to do this. And it's a really good thing. It's on about the third or fourth page. Should be in there. Here it says not the hot spots for the year 2003. It's the one that's a little earlier. Can I look at yours, Tom? Because I have my own packet. And here. The important transits for 2003. Do you see that? It's about third or fourth page in from the front. From the front. Go from the front. And then just pick it up. 1, 2, right there. Yeah, there you go. Okay. This is actually not mine. This actually came from Stephanie Austin, who's a very good friend of mine, and she just sent this to me, and so I'm sharing it with you. I thought this would be a great thing for you all to have, because before we start examining the ephemeris, this is kind of an overview of what's happening this year. And I have listed in here the new and the full moon. She has listed in here the new and the full moons, all right? And we'll look at the ephemeris to look at that. But if you go down a little further, are you all on the same page with me? Does somebody not have this? You see where it says retrograde planets? Okay, those are actually the listings for the days that planets go retrograde and go direct. I thought that that would be an important thing for you to have too, because that's the next point we're going to examine. You know, a lot of people ask about retrogrades. What is a retrograde? Well, you know, I've heard people explain it in various ways. Well, you know, the planet's going backwards. The planet's not really going back. Yes, Akira. Did you want to ask a question? Okay. Oh, okay. They think a planet's going backwards, but a planet's not going backwards. Planets don't go backwards. They just don't. The Earth looks like the Earth is passing, is speeding up, is moving forward in orbit, and the planet is appearing to be going backward. So not all the planets go retrograde. The sun never goes retrograde. The sun is a constant. It's probably one of the most constant planets we have. It's 1 degree a day per year. And it's the light. It's how things shine. Moon never goes retrograde, ever, 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 ever. The other planets do. Usually your outer planets like Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, the out-of-bounds planets, so to speak, they'll go once a year, 3 to 5 months. It's pretty steady, okay? Mercury is about 3 times a year. You all know that. I don't know if you all know that, but it is 3 times a year. But there's an interesting thing with the Mercury cycle, and that's what I thought I would show you. I have, does anybody have their own ephemerises with them here? No? Okay. Well, let me pull out, I don't know if I have, I know I have there it is. We're going to be referring, this is May 2003. This is from, this book I really like. I like the bigger ephemeris if you want a whole lot of details that you can't in the smaller red book. This one? Okay. One of the things, this is American ephemeris, this is Neil Michelson's group, ACS, I think. And one of the things that I really like about this particular ephemeris is that they're very visual with the way they work with you. In other words, when a planet is going retrograde in the ephemeris, in this version, it's always gray. In other words, you see May here? See the winged messenger Mercury at the top there with the little hat on him, and we're going to go through that. See how this is gray all the way to about May 19th or May 20th where it says D? You can actually look at this and just white out those pages to see when that's happening every year. But I've made it really easy for you. I actually put a sheet in here for you to have by your desk sites, which is from ACS, free. And it's the Mercury retrograde calendar for 2003. Okay? Now, why I gave you this one rather than doing another one is I really like what they did here because they do something that I do all the time with every single planet that goes retrograde. You know, people think that when a planet goes retrograde, the day that it goes retrograde is the difficult day. Good. You don't think that. Good. It's not true. Some people think the day it goes direct is the day that everything's clear. Okay? That's not necessarily true either, although you usually see some sort of a shift. There are the retrograde periods, but there are certain periods before the retrogrades. And these are really important too, really, really, really important. If you don't get anything else out of today, this is a really important thing to get, okay? There are before the period of the retrograde and after the period of the retrograde. It depends on the speed of the planet. Mercury's a little bit more measurable. Pluto takes a little longer, but let's work with Mercury. There is a time when we go through the ephemeris that it starts to it continues with its planetary movement, but it really does start to slow down. And you really can't tell that just from looking at the ephemeris unless you've got a really, really good eye or you have a calculator or a computer. Okay? But what you do is, and we can look at this example right here. For example, we just finished with a wonderful Mercury retrograde. A wonderful Mercury retrograde that actually started, officially it started on January 2nd of 2003. Officially it started, or the 1st, depending on where you're living. And officially, the Mercury went direct on, if you look at this, and if you look in your ephemeris, it went direct on the, let me see upside down here. It went direct on the 22nd, and the retrogrades are marked in my example, but unfortunately in yours it's not marked that way. Now, if you notice in here, this person who did design this has continued to put some gray spots after the direct. You see that? Okay. Now, if we had a month of December, we would see gray spots too, because what happens is when a planet goes retrograde, it'll go back to a certain point, degree and minute in the zodiac. It'll retrograde back to a position, Like this was, I think, 0 degrees of Capricorn. The day it goes direct, everybody's all excited because, gee, this is the day everything's going to change. But really, if we're going to be realistic about this, after the planet goes direct, it takes a couple more weeks with Mercury, because Mercury's fast, for it to really crank up the engine, okay, and get back on track, which in this case would officially be around February 11th, okay? On February 11th of 2003, Mercury will be back at the same degree and minute it was when it went retrograde, okay? Which sometimes is a very subtle day where you see change. You see news things happening, like, for example, today is interesting because today Neptune is at, they call this the shadow position. Today, Neptune is at the shadow position in the sky. And I think that's very interesting. What are they talking about? Chemical warfare, high security. They went to orange this morning, or they're announcing orange this morning on the DC. Yeah, today and tomorrow, Neptune is at the shadow position. And Uranus will be at the shadow position, unfortunately, the week of February 18th through 20th, when there's a full moon, when Sun is conjunct Uranus. Uranus will also be at the shadow position, and that's also 90 days after the eclipse. So I suspect that the week of February 16th through 20th is going to be quite an interesting week. That's all I can say. For the markets, I'm sure it's going to be an amazing week. I don't know what to tell you because I don't trade, I just analyze, okay? Now, there's also, so do you all understand what I'm saying here? I actually put out a little calendar that shows those shadow positions, boom, so that you don't have to think about it. But you can just go through your ephemeris and mark these with highlighters for different planets. Now, anybody not understand what I'm saying here? Honestly, it's okay if you don't. You got it, right, Tom? Okay.
Can you get that on this website with the markup?
Yes, you can. That's where I got it. I put all the sources always right on the page. Yes, Tim?
Do you know of a visual, maybe in the software, in GD software, that shows the shadow in sort of a graphical way?
Ask Linda. She would know. Oh, she's busy working. I don't know. I don't have that software. I only have the stock trader right now.
Okay.
Okay, you were going to ask us.
The start point and then return?
Yeah, here's what it is. Let me draw it out, okay? Can I draw it out? I think that would be easier to do a graphic. Okay, I'm going to be graphic today. All right. First of all, Mercury, we might as well start. That's what Mercury looks like in the ephemeris. And some people are confused about this. Think of the FTD floral guy. The guy with the wings and the little hat with wings. This character has wings on his hat. That's Mercury. Hermes, the winged messenger who brings information quickly, goes in and out of hell unscathed. Okay? So that's one of the things about Mercury. It's very quick, it's very savvy, it's very neutral. It can take on either side, but it moves quickly. Now, let's look at January of 2003. Officially, Mercury went R, retrograde, which for me, retrograde, it always looks like the Rexall drugs thing. It means things like research, rethink, rework, restudy, re-examine, return, remove. In other words, Mercury retrogrades are really good for cleaning things out, for sorting things out. On January 2nd of 2003, Mercury officially went retrograde, and on January, just this last week, I think it was 22nd, it went direct. So most people would think, okay, it's this period that it's off, okay? But we really, when it went retrograde on January 2nd of 2003, it was at about 28 degrees of Capricorn. When it started moving like it was going backwards. When it went direct on January 22nd, I think it was about 0 to 2 degrees, somewhere in there, wasn't it? Capricorn. Now, 2 does not make 28, does it? So we really, even though it's gone direct on January 22nd, we really have to wait until about February 11th, I think it is. Is it the 11th or the 12th? For it to get back to 28 degrees of Capricorn. In other words, there's this revving up of the engine. And what will happen many times is on this day, which may not have anything else significant going on, some action will take place. Because it's like sewing. You drop a stitch, you have to go back and pick up the stitches. That's called the shadow position. And in the little book I have, I always have like this shadow box thing. Okay? Yes?
Is there significance, because obviously if it goes retrograde on the 2nd, does it take a while for, obviously it takes a while for it to slow down, so is there a midpoint or something?
That's my next point. Thank you. Yeah, this is after the fact, okay? But there is a pre-period too. And I think sometimes what I've been looking at, that's even more important, okay? So can I take this off the board? Y'all have that? All right, so let's take this part off. Very good. All right. Now, if it went retrograde at 28 degrees of Capricorn on 2003, let me look at somewhere around December of 2002. Let's see. I want to find, all right, let me just check one more thing. 12. Okay, 12. All right. Mercury 12 was on about December 17th. Okay. On December 17th of 2002, that was last year, at the end of last year. Either that or the 16th, depending on where you live, because you know, if you're living in London, it's different than living in California. On that day, Mercury had arrived in the sky, had been moving along, moving along, moving along. It arrived in the sky at about 12 degrees of Capricorn. Okay? And actually, when Mercury went direct, it was not 0, it was 12 degrees of Capricorn on January 22nd. It was not 2. So before the date where it was legally retrograde, that was how many weeks? If this is December 17th and this is January 2nd, or how many days? 15 days, 16 days, somewhere in there? So already, what it did, it crossed the point in the sky at which it was going to go direct down here. So lots of times, even though they say you're not supposed to sign contracts in Mercury retrogrades and you watch your numbers, etc., you really have to kind of start watching when it hits what I call the pre-shadow position. Now, does anybody know what was going on in the markets around 16th and 17th of December? I don't know. Anybody have any record on that? You might want to check that. You may want to actually do a little study of this, go back over the year, look in your ephemeris, and see what degree did Mercury retrograde back to all those other 2 times, okay? And before it went retrograde, what degree did it go over that it was going to retrograde back to? So that you actually have 2 weeks here coming, 3 weeks happening, and about another couple weeks catching up. So what are we looking at here? We're not looking at 3 weeks. We're looking at about what? 6 to 7 weeks, aren't we? Yeah, I notice a lot because I sell real estate. I'm back selling real estate after many years of not selling it. And when I sold it before, I was doing the same thing. Our contracts in our business, people start to get a little flaky with their contracts when Mercury starts to cross that point. They're thinking, should I do it? You know, they'll do it, but things have to be worked out. So this is a very, very important period. And you can do this with any of the planets. You can do this with Venus when it goes retrograde. You can do it with Mars. You can even do it with Saturn and Neptune. Like I told you today, Neptune is at the shadow position. Neptune went retrograde like last May, you know. And this is like, it went direct in October, but it's not until today, which is what? This is February 6th or 7th. February 7th, this is the day it caught up to where it left off. So always watch those outer planets to see what happens. And Neptune, I don't know, the markets were kind of doing some crazy things the last couple of days, were they not? Kind of squirrely. Weren't they squirrely the last couple of days? The Dow Jones?
Within the same range.
Yeah, they just kind of going like this? It'd be interesting to watch. Okay. Okay. So is that clear? All right. So if we go and we look at this example, except that you don't have the predate. This is a little pop quiz. All right. Let's see, retrograde here goes back to 11. Okay, 11. April 13th, 2003. Let's erase this. I call it the pre-shadow. The shadow? The shadow. Yeah, I call it the pre-shadow. Most people call this the shadow here, but I call this the pre-shadow because I have noticed that things start changing beforehand. Now, let's look at this May example where we actually see on this ephemeris Mercury is going direct. Okay. Now, I'm going to go back to April, and I'm going to look at Okay, April 13th of 2003 is an important date, and April 26th of 2003 is the day that Mercury goes retrograde. At what degree? Let's see. Excuse me, it's the 26th at 20 degrees. Let's say 21 degrees. All right, let's just round them off here. Of Taurus. All right. All right. Now, don't look at this. Let's look at this first. Mercury is right here. All right. Now, if you look at this, can you? Maybe it needs to be a little. It's about as clear as we can make it happen. Okay. You notice here on about the 20th of May, Mercury is going direct. Can you see the D? Okay, it's at 11. There's the bull on top with the horns. Taurus, 11 Taurus, 7. Now, that's a direct day, but and things should start moving forward at that point. But if we move down, and of course it's not here, if we keep moving down and we go into June of 2003, in June of 2003, let's see, 20, 32. June 6, 2003 is the day that Mercury gets back to where it was when it went retrograde, which was 20 degrees of, let's see, is that right? Taurus, right. In other words, and April 13th of 2003 is the day that, let's see, Mercury, 10, let's see, direct, 11. 11 degrees Taurus. Okay. Okay. It goes direct at 11 Taurus, right? April 13th, 2003 is when it crosses over into 11 Taurus, 12 Taurus, 13 Taurus, till we get to April 26th. So at this point, on April 13th, it's starting to waver a little bit here. Okay? Because it goes direct at 11 degrees of Taurus on, what's the date? April 20th, right? Okay, so in other words, the pre-hit is April 13th. It retrogrades April 26th. What did I do wrong here? Oh, I'm sorry, this is May, sorry. That's May 20th, it goes direct. And then it finally catches up to the shadow position on June 6th. So we're looking at the real retrograde period as being 3 weeks here, April 26th through May 20th. Post-retrograde, when it goes direct and has to catch up, that's June 6th or June 7th, depending on where you live. I always say that. Before the retrograde period is April 13th of 2003, when Mercury has gone to 11 Taurus, which is exactly the same degree it's going to go direct at on May 20th. Is that clear? Does anybody work with this at all? No? It's really a great, and of course you have to look at other factors. You can't just base it on this. You can look at, like I said, all the planets. And I would, in fact, what I would do if I were all you is do that with Mars this year. Because, because Mars is going to go retrograde, I think, late July at about, I think it's 10 or 11 Pisces. But the pre-shadow is somewhere around, I think it's May. And it goes direct around September 22nd of 2003 at 0 Pisces, but it's going to take another couple of months to catch up to get back to 10, 11 Pisces. So we're looking, if you think about that, we're not looking at just 2 months of a Mars retrograde, because Mars has to do with spending. Okay? Yes?
Plus, how about the fact that it's closest to the Earth? It's been in like...
Yeah, perihelion. Yes. Yeah, that makes it. And Saturn, too, will be perihelion this summer, too. July 28th, I think. First time since 73, I think.
Right. Does that make it more...
Well, that's a very good question. That's like my next point. And I actually have a graphic for that, which you fellas don't and ladies do not have in yours. But do you know perihelion? Well, okay. This is just another way of looking at things. This is a little geometry. There's a thing called declinations, which I don't even want to go into, but I really think that if you do any kind of work with trading or cycles, declinations are really, really, really important. And the key thing to remember here, this is really the key thing. This is the equator here, okay? What degree do you see north here? What's that degree up there? 23.5 degrees north, right? And what's the degree down here? 23.5 degrees south. Now this takes into account the tilt of the Earth, the axis of the Earth. In fact, I have, so it is answering actually your perihelion question in a kind of a visual way. This is a little better drawing. It's a little messy, but on this drawing there's some things that are a little off, but just ignore this stuff up here. This is kind of a picture of the Earth, the tilting of the Earth's axis and the principle of declination. The drawing I just told you, remember I said look at 23.5 north? That's here. And 23.5 south is here. Okay? Now, what that basically is in terms of the signs. Okay? The sign of Cancer, which comes during the summer solstice, right? The longest day of the year, first day of summer is 0 degrees of Cancer. That's one of the power points of the year. It's one of the 4 cycles. Cancer literally goes only up to 23.5 degrees. You can see it, only 23.5 degrees. And that's when the days are the longest, okay? Now, over here, 23.5 degrees south is when we see the sun south of the equator, when we have winter up here in the north, where we have very bright, short days, but very long, cold nights, okay? The bottom here is 0 degrees of Capricorn, okay? So anytime we have a planet, let's look, we're just looking at Saturn in this case, not Mars, all right? Saturn's very slow. It takes how many? 30 years approximately to circle the sun. So every 30 years, Saturn returns to Cancer for 2.5 or so years, like it does for every sign. Cancer is as far north as it can go. In other words, we can't go any further, and it's interesting. They say perihelion. Now, looking at this drawing, you think, gee, that's pretty far from the Earth, but really it's much closer to the sun. You see what I'm saying? In other words, if we go back to this drawing, just forget that the word sun is there, okay? This summer, on June 3rd, 2003, Saturn is going to reach 0 degrees of Cancer, which is at the apex here. It's at 23.5 degrees north. It can't go any further, okay? And if we go back, which is very interesting, and you all remember this, remember early 90s, about 1992, 1991, when Saturn was in Capricorn? You don't remember that? Persian Gulf War? Yeah, all those planets were in Capricorn? Okay. That's when Saturn was down here, south, 23.5 degrees south, because Capricorn is south and Cancer is north. Spring and fall equinox are equal day, equal night, and they're right on the celestial equator. Okay? We have equal day, equal night. That's what equinox means. 12 hours of day, 12 hours of night. Saturn will be reaching this position this summer. It's closer to the sun. And in 92, Saturn was furthest from the sun. It was what they call aphelion. Saturn was in Capricorn, okay? And that actually, these declinations are really interesting because what these basically do, without getting, I don't want to get too gone because I really want to do basics here, but see, is this okay with you guys? You all right with this? I'm going to go off a little bit and do something else. You're all very good students, so I'm going to try this. If it doesn't work, we'll go right back to the program. If I can find it, I know I had it. You might want to turn that off for a minute while I find the sheets. They're in here. I didn't think I could use this, but I did bring it just in case, so hang in with me. Here it is, right here. Now I'm going to show you something, and I don't want you to think too much. Okay, don't think too much. Just look at the visual, all right? Just look at the visual. All right. I get this, I think I got this off of, I think I use WinStar for this graph. wind star matrix. I use that in the, I have about 5 programs, and I use them for all these different things. And this is a declination graph. This is showing degrees north, degrees south, 23.5 degrees north, 23.5 degrees south. And this is calculated for, coincidentally enough, December 15th, 2002 to December 14th, 2003. So it's for this year. First point. Second point, and we're going to be talking about this a little bit later. You see up there at the top left, it says 45-degree ephemeris? Okay. Remember that drawing we were having here with the 90s, the 45s, the stress points, okay? So the 45-degree ephemeris, this is a graphic ephemeris. This is literally, somebody was saying earlier, the confluence, you were saying that, John, okay. The confluence of the planets, you know, the relationships, when they come together is when things happen. The reason we use the 45-degree graphic ephemeris, or the 90-degree graphic ephemeris, or the 22.5-degree graphic ephemeris, which all add up to what? 9, or 22.5 adds up to 9, all right? Is this shows the cross relationship points of stress, where stress is created and you may have reversals, okay? If we use the 60-degree, it's easy. Nothing happens. If we use 100 trines, sextiles, you know, things may happen, but the hard angles is where we get this. In fact, you can actually drop this down to 11 point something, and I don't know what that number is off the top. So what I did is I ran this ephemeris, and I ran it for just the planets, all the planets moving together at the same time. And if you notice here, because around December of 2002, moving through the sky, Saturn, transiting Saturn, has been late degrees of Gemini, right? Late Gemini. Somewhere in around November, December, Saturn went retrograde, started to look like it was going backwards, correct? Now, the day that Saturn went retrograde, it was at 29 degrees Gemini and change. In other words, if it had just kept moving, it would have gone into Cancer, like just, it was right there, but it didn't quite make it. So, where is Saturn in terms of declination? Saturn in December was pretty close to that 23.5, right? Because it didn't go to zero Cancer, so it didn't get all the way. So we're watching this through the summer months, and here in June, this is where it's going to be at this top point of declination over the next 2.5 years. And that's when it's closest to the sun. And they're saying the closest is at 0 degrees. Okay? So the 0 to 3 degrees this summer, around July 28th is the date, I think, or July 26th is the perihelion. Now, there's another one I want to show you, which is kind of fun.
Which one's the satellite? Is that the one that's going up and down?
Oh, I'm sorry. See this little hook here? Captain Hook?
Yes, okay.
That's Saturn. All right? It's going all the way through here. If in fact we were in 92 when the Persian Gulf was happening, that line wouldn't be up there. That line would have been down across here. Okay? And we really in terms of the big cycles like Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, really cool to watch this. I have actually charts. I work with corn. I work with corn, soybean, and wheat traders in Nebraska through this client of mine in Texas. And he has me present these 4-hour things to his fellows at Caesar's Palace about once every 2 years. And, you know, they know the moon cycles, but they're very good. I have to say they're very good. So this is how I show them. I show them the long-term cycles when Pluto is crossing Neptune. Because basically, anytime you have a hard angle graphic ephemeris, 45 degrees hard, and you see 2 of the moving planets coming together, like here, that means that's a stress point. That's creating one of those 9s that you saw over there, one of those 8-fold figures. This is another stress point here. This is a big stress point here. Okay? And I've put this in your packet. You all have a copy of this, not of the declinations, but of the graphic ephemeris, which is just the transits coming together. But this is really a really fascinating thing to watch, especially in terms of historical cycles. Yes? Any questions?
That was the fall bottoms of the market.
When Saturn went direct, huh?
Down at, I think it was 12, 13, 15th October.
Really?
Yeah, it was literally the bottom.
Right.
It went all the way up to Jupiter retro was the top, the next top.
Oh, Jupiter retro. Now that would make sense, doesn't it?
There, stopped, came down from there.
Oh, that's
Watch
fascinating.
retro direct, California, S&P.
Yeah, the declinations are really, really wonderful because, you know, the thing that's interesting about declinations is that, you know, you can look in the ephemeris and you can see a conjunction. Basically, you can recognize aspects. But with declination, sometimes it's not an aspect. It's literally two planets that are not forming an aspect but are by declination at exactly the same, like, for example, I'll give you an example in writing. Let me just do it over here. Okay. So, for example, this is the equator here, right? Okay. This is 23.5 north degrees, 23.5 south. Okay? North, south. All right. You can actually have, this is kind of a bogus one. I'm just going to roll around in my head. You can actually have a Saturn line going like this, for example. All right, whatever. Actually, it'll be a little less volatile. It'll be more like that. And let's say that this is, a Mars line. Okay? It looks like a Mars line, doesn't it? All right. And now, when these two come together, they're at the same declination, right? Right? It shows that they're at the same. We're not talking about crossing over. We're saying that they're the same northerly distance above the equator. They may not have an aspect going on at that point. But they're in declination with each other. If they're north with north, it's like a conjunction.
It's like a conjunction, or
It can be a conjunction, but it may not be a conjunction. That's the magic of it. It is a conjunction, but it doesn't have to be.
So it is the same effect as a conjunction.
Same effect as a conjunction, exactly. If, for example, we have the same energy going on down here, like we have a Saturn line and a Mars here, or whatever, you can use any two planets, they're south with south, right? That's considered like a conjunction, because they're at the same, they have the same side of the equator, right? You can't have one that's 23.5 here north and 23.5 south and call it conjunction. But if you have one that's 20, whatever it is, say 22 here north, and you have one at 22 south, that's what they call, it's called a contraparallel. This together is a parallel. A parallel, that's what it looks like. And they should only be about 15 minutes apart. That's how tight they should be. 22.5 south, 22 north, 22 south, they're like an opposition. They form like an opposition, and that's called a contraparallel. And oppositions will be contraparallel, but it may not be opposite in the sky, but it still is a contraparallel. So these are the subtleties when you're, yes?
Why 15 minutes?
How many?
15 minutes.
To do what?
You said it should be 15 minutes, the most power.
Oh, I'm sorry, 15 minutes. Okay, I didn't know which 15 minutes we were referring to. Yeah, some people look at the degrees. You know, some people will go, okay, it's 22 degrees, and this one's 23 degrees. This is north, this is north. Oh, they're close enough. Well, they're not. They're really not. They really should be, this should be about, let's say this should be 22.75, 22 3/4, 15 minutes. You know, they should be within 15 minutes. In other words, 0 degrees, whatever the sign is, say Leo. Is that you can actually pop your arrow, your mouse on there, and you can get a time date on that. Right. And I did that with my trader guys, my corn guys, and it was really interesting. The soybean and corn, the soybean figures seem to correlate very well with the declination figures. Yes?
So that graphic is set for 45 or 90 modulus?
Yes. Yeah, you can set it. Yeah, you can set it either way. Now, this is not. This is a declination graph. It's not graphic ephemeris. It's declination, which just is showing the relationships between the two. Okay, showing how these planets are crossing in terms of. This is how the planets literally are moving through the sky. You know.
The max min on the moon is really powerful.
Say that again.
Minimum points of the moon's declination.
Yeah, I would suspect when they go up to 23 or got down to 23.
It actually goes more 24, 25, 26.
Yeah, they go out of bounds, right? Yeah, and I'm curious, what happens when they go to 0? Because I know the ephemeris always shows 0 north, 0 south.
Changes again.
Okay,
Another
does everybody know what John's talking about? Yeah, you can actually see that in the ephemeris. Let's, I don't know if this one shows it. I know my other ephemeris shows it. This ephemeris show it? Oh, it does, but it's in the middle of all the other daily aspects. Let's find that aspect thing here. Why don't you turn that off for a moment and let me find it. It's just here. We've got retrograde. We've got the declination. Here's the ephemeris. Okay. Don't turn that on quite yet, please. It's really hard to see this. I don't know if you can't. Do we have one of those pointers? One of those laser pointers?
Laser pointer? Ray does. I'm not sure he uses one.
Oh, well, I can point. It's just easier. All right. See how it has. The great thing about this larger red book is that it does show you the declinations in the large red page. The smaller red book, which is great too, does not have your declinations. You have to get those off the computer or another ephemeris. But if you look at this, a little hard to see. See, there's the moon. And look at here. See where it's 0 here? And see where it's 0 here? The latitude. This is the declination here. God, it goes all the way out. 25, 26.
Right, 25, 26.
See the zeros here? Zeros, zeros. That's where they're shifting from north to south. And you can see that in this ephemeris when you look at it. It's literally when the moon is going over this point. And I always wonder about that because I've been watching that.
Very strong.
It's very strong? Yeah, it's a reverse. It's a reverse probably, isn't it?
Yep.
Because you're going from the northern side to the southern side. And the same thing too, when something's peaking here, same. Because it's like the rubber band is stretched as far as it's going to get stretched, and it starts dropping, you know?
The occasion that in the maximum north or maximum mid, it'll go one more day, even at.
Oh, it'll hold it.
And then go. But usually within that 2 days, it'll turn.
Really?
Yeah, you have to be careful because sometimes it's a 1 day stretch. And
Well, it probably depends on the speed of the moon. I bet it depends on the speed of the moon. If it's a slow moon, it's probably going to be slower moving,
yeah.
you know?
But
If it's fast, it's going to probably be fast, anxious. Yeah, I call fast moons anxious moons.
yeah, that will be cool look at that correlation. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, well,
That's a very powerful critical.
How do you know whether it's fast one or slow?
very good question. Boy, you guys have great questions here. Now, I may actually just have a graph of that, too. If I do, it's going to be a miracle, because I might have...
You look at the 23 and a half.
Is north, 23.7.
But that's just as high as you can see it in the sky? Or?
That's great. Yes, Eric. It's as high as you can see it in the sky. It doesn't mean that it's not going further.
Right.
You know, well, actually, the sun won't go further than 23 and a half. But when something goes above, like John was talking about the moon, Mars will do that. Like Christopher Reeve, I know he's a person, but we used him as a case study. His natal Mars is at like 24 and a half degrees out of bounds south, I think it is, either south or north. And in fact, when his accident happened, he was having an aspect to that Mars. In other words, not in touch with your Mars, you know. So when something goes out of bounds, it's still there. We just don't see it.
Yeah, Mars goes out of bounds in May.
Mars goes out of bounds in May. Exactly, exactly.
Powerful change.
Yeah. And how you find these? Well, I'm sure that in Jeannie's program she has this, but I have, I happen to have it. I can't believe this. This is a trip. Now, this is actually Christopher Reeve. He was our case study for Kepler. In fact, I wonder if I should show you this. Yeah, I'll show it to you. Just pretend this is not a person, okay? This is not a person. All right, this is what they, in the Solar Fire program, you choose your chart, and then there's a report thing you choose. And this is the basic report, which shows, obviously, what I like about this is like they call this a speculum. It shows you the longitude and the sign, obviously, of the planet. This shows you the speed, travel. See that? And I'll go back on that. This is the declination here. Okay? Don't worry about the others for right now. But if you look at, oh, this is a great example because this is very rare. If you look up there at his moon, his natal moon is 12 Sag, 32 minutes. Look at the travel speed on that. It was plus 13 degrees, 24 minutes. That's a fast moon. That's fast. It would start to move into the fast end because about 12,
13, 17 is average.
yeah, 13, 17, see, it's starting to go over the edge here, you know, and I've seen them up to 14 and a half, I've seen moons.
Well, 1454, I think is the
So that's called a fast moon. That's how you figure out how fast it's moving. Each planet has a travel period, but the moon, since it moves so quickly, and I know you use the moon in trading, I'm sure you do, don't you? Don't you? Use the moon in trading? Yeah, I suspect you do. That's the timing device, right? You want to look at the speed. So what John is saying might be worth looking at. When we're seeing a moon moving in declination and it's a slower moon, you may have a longer period. Yeah. If it's a fast moon, if you're getting 14 and a half degree speed moon, I'd say, hey, maybe a few hours. You know? I mean, that's how I would measure it, you know? Now, just as an example, though, I did want to show you what I was saying about Mars, because we were talking about how this coming spring Mars will be out of bounds, right? This Mars is 18 Sag, 15 minutes, okay? Go right across the board. I don't have a pointer, but can you see where it says minus 24 degrees, 54 minutes? Can you see it? Minus means south. Plus means north. 24 degrees, 54 minutes. This is the norm, 23 and a half north plus minus 23 and a half is the norm. So what's that one at what? His Mars was out here at minus 24 natally. So he was always very active. I mean, he was physically very impulsive. He was very impulsive, and Mars can be very impulsive if you're not in touch with it. It's interesting, isn't it? I love declinations. I think if somebody could really do a thorough study on declinations, they'd have a lot of answers. So this is one of the ways you find it. I'm sure all the programs, including Linda's program and Jeannie's program, have this. I'm sure they have declinations, don't they?
Yes.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah, because this is important. All right, we have about 5 minutes before we take a break. So what I think we're going to do is take a break. But before we do, because I don't want to start into something new 5 minutes before break. Any questions, any comments before we take a break?
When you were doing the thing about the retrograde and shadow, you had, I think exactly you had it was like 11 degrees, and then it slowed down to like 20 degrees, and then went back to 11 degrees. Is that because it was counterclockwise, or why would?
Oh, thank you. I happen to have an illustration of that, which is in your packet. Which is someplace in this packet. Mine is completely out of order now. Here it is. This is retrograde motion of Mars, but it's still the same idea. Just get this a little bit more. There. Okay. It's a little hard to fit it in here. But if you look at this is the Earth moving 1, 2, 3. This is the Earth moving in its orbit. This is Mars moving in its orbit, okay? First phase, if you go up there, this is Mars, you know, looking like it's moving along, having a pretty good day. This is Mars here, forward. Now, what's happening as it's starting to line up with the Earth, this is actually called an opposition. There's inferior, which is inside the orbit, and there's superior. This is a superior opposition. This is lining up. When it looks like they're opposite each other, that's when you start to see retrograde motion, okay? Now what's happening is, if you look, I can't even, where's my line thing here? There's 3. Oh, you've got the thing. Oh, my God. Magic. Thank you. Yeah, basically, you see how it's looking like it's starting to track back? And then it goes forward, right there. That's the orbit. See, here, let me pull this down. Maybe you can see a little bit. Oh, wait. Take the tape off. That might help. There. Here, can I have that? Thanks. Yeah, thank you. Oh, this is great. Magic. All right. Yeah, right. All right, this is the first Mars apparent path, second, third. See this 4th period here? See how it's falling? It looks like it's falling behind at this point. it's not really doing it. It's just passing it. And I always think that's like the energy is getting shorted out. Now, Mars is going to be a lot slower. Mercury is going to be a lot faster.
Well, where on the chart would you draw the pre-shadow? I mean, with the pre-shadow?
Oh, with the pre-shadow, that's the question you're asking?
Right.
That's not even on this chart.
Right, but we wouldn't be able to see the point where, I mean, I guess you could really see the point, but is that when it starts to with the curve, right? Where it starts to...
Right, where it starts to curve, yeah. Yeah, where it starts to accelerate and decelerate, right here. Yeah. Here.
Okay.
But basically, look at this orbit here, Earth's orbit. That's why some of these drawings have to be redone. It basically looks like it's falling behind. And actually, if you think about the Earth's orbit and Mars, when it starts to pre-shadow, it's about here.
Right.
Okay, it's kind of like below the line. And that's one of the reasons I think when we see Mars going retrograde like it's going to do it this year, it's really important. Last time it went retrograde, we had the war in Kosovo. No, the war in Kosovo was the 2 Mars retrogrades ago. And then the Mars retrograde that caught up to its shadow position was 2 days before September 11th. Huh? We got one. Thank you. 2 magic wands. Okay. Yeah, the last Mars retrograde was spring of 2001 through summer of 2001. And Saturday before September 11th was the 8th of September. That was when Mars got back to its, Saturday or Sunday was when Mars got back to its shadow position at 0 Capricorn, I think it was. And then September 11th. And we had the war in Kosovo the 2 years before that. Are we finished with this side? Okay.
That was a big top, right around September 11th, all the way to Saturn, go to the right, the next level.
I'm going to stop now. We're going to stop and then take a break. Okay? Everybody